you very much. Indeed, it's a pleasure to be here in Pune under the flagship of Higher Education and Research Society. The first ever such program organized under this organization. We are very thankful to NICAMS for inviting us here, and indeed it's a kind of a thing to see them working is amazing. We work with an institution behind us, like a university or college. We get a fund from UGC or other things to organize an event, but yet again, after all those backing up, to think of organizing anything is such a difficult task, and they both of them are single-handedly in that way are organizing such a kind of a thing. So I go back here with a kind of motivation that there are people who are working, and they do not excuse that we are in this system, we are in that system, and everything is rotten, and so I don't want to work. So, but here there are people who work irrespective of the rotten state of several of the things, as Professor Patil already mentioned about the rottenness. Well, coming to the topic here in the discussion, several part of the things are already been talked and very thoroughly been discussed in a quite humorous way by Dr. Patil. Even Madam also had dealt with some of the part about the trauma, which also was one of the section of my presentation here. I would try to skip those parts to avoid a kind of a repetition. The presentation obviously is a bit lengthy also. I tried to cover up the contemporary fictions by and large, and two poets only, to see that how the things are going on. And I also wanted to study some of the popular films, because popular films, rather than the literature, captures or mirrors the collective consciousness of the people quite immediately. So an immediate mirroring of the collective consciousness of the people we find in popular cinema rather than in the literature. In literature we have to wait at least for 20-30 years for those things to come up. So like we go to Bangladesh, we find now the 1970s and 80s coming up in their literature. Our literature still is struggling to get out of 1947. Coming to 1980s, there is an NRI movement, and those things is getting reflected. But what is happening now in the 21st century, when we have entered the second decade of this 21st century, what is happening? Films perhaps mirrors that. When it comes to the idea about mirroring of the images of society, of culture, of people's consciousness into literature, I sometimes think of several images that what literature is, whether it's a mirror to society, or it's a photographic image of a society, culture, or it is an X-ray image of the culture and society. X-ray image is one such a kind of a reality that we do not like to see. Somebody presents our X-ray image and says, this is you. We do not like to see ourselves in an X-ray photograph because it's a bit ugly. It's black and white. It's showing us a kind of a skeleton. Literature is showing that skeleton at times, whereas films present a photography or a mirroring of the consciousness. So this big difference we find in films and literature when we study those things. When we are organizing this event, a very unhappy incident happened very recently, and that I think just yesterday only, that Sushmita Banerjee, who wrote a diary with the name Kabuliwala's Bengali Wife, has been killed by Taliban in Afghanistan. So with this reality we live in South Asia, that this narrow domestic walls, how strongly we have built, that it becomes very difficult for us to break down those walls and to bridge a kind of a friendship or any such kind of things also. A beautiful movie also made from the same work, Kabuliwala's Bengali Wife, which was known as Escape from Taliban. Well, my presentation will try to cover up the kind of a thing in this order. We'll see one by one several things. The problem with the nomenclature, South Asia or Indian subcontinent. Somehow, the other world, the West or the other countries do not accept this as Indian subcontinent. Indians would argue that why not Indian subcontinent? This is the Indian plate on which these countries are located. And so if you give a name, Indian subcontinent, but there is a problem. So nomenclature itself is a problem, Indian subcontinent or South Asia. We are thinking of the walls, the domestic walls, that sometimes do not allow us to bridge the gaps. We have to put aside for a while the Western interference or how the West is creating all this kind of thing, and that what we have created within our own identities. So non-acceptance of India or Indian identity, or is it the inferiority complex of the smaller countries surrounding India? Or is it the superiority complex of India as a big brother, that there is something wrong in either of the ways? American youth and some surveys that go on at times, which we read on internet and some newspapers, American youth don't know much about the world. And obviously they don't know because they feel superior than the remaining world. And why should they care for the other world? The other world will care for them. Well, Indian youth also is, by and large, unaware about the border issues. What is identity, or what is it living in Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, or Pakistan or Afghanistan? By and large, the young Indians are unaware about those things. Is it the same thing, that the superiority of the India as a big brother that reflects in this, and is it a kind of a mental hurdle in accepting the nomenclature? Countries, as it is quite clear, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal and Bhutan. SAARC motto, as it is also reflected in the brochure of our conference, I take the word from that. This friendship idea came from that particular motto of the SAARC, which is also in our brochure. We are mad dreamers of the SAARC region. Let government do their political and diplomatic work. Let us, the writers and the creative fraternity of the region, endeavor to create bridges of the friendship across the border. Herein comes the role of literature in creating the cultural coalescence among the said countries. We have to question whether literature is doing this or not. Has literature successfully done this or not? Are our films doing this or not? Yes or no, the problem will remain. There is no clear-cut answer regarding yes or no. We will overview the contemporary writings and we will have our own conclusions whether it is, the answer is yes or the answer we don't know also. Some of the theoretical counterpart, very briefly overviewing the things, I would like to remember E.V. Ramakrishna's one of the quote, Homi K. Bhabha's idea of nation, Farooq Tondi, who has also given an interesting concept regarding the Asian literature. Well, if I recall E.V. Ramakrishnan, professor and head of Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar, he has said that if you want to read this literature, not only Indian but South Asian, then you have to recontextualize it in the context of caste, religion, region, gender and such things. Today morning even Professor Patil also said that we do not do a kind of a caste-based reading of our literature. Rather we do not encourage those kind of reading. Rather we try to discourage the caste-based reading or division of the kind of thing. The reality is that it is very much there. I do agree with him that it is very much in our consciousness, and yet we try to put a heavy curtain over those kind of realities, and maybe because of that also sometimes we cannot understand what our real identities are. So he also puts a kind of a thing like that these things are very necessary to understand the literature written in South Asian things. Homi K. Bhabha, in the introduction of narrating the nation, he writes about this nation as a modern Janus, double-faced kind of a thing. There is a progress, there is a regression, and both the movement by and large happens simultaneously. This paragraph is important. Nation is narrated in terror of the space or race of other with capital O, the comfort of social belonging, the hidden injuries of class, the customs of caste, the powers of political affiliations, the sense of social order, the sensibility of sexuality, the blindness of bureaucracy, the straight insight of institution, the quality of justice, the common sense of injustice, the land of the low, the peril of the people. Now this by and large is still, to the best of my knowledge, is not understood in the South Asian literature also. We'll see some of the examples. Nation is an agency of ambivalent narration that holds culture at its most productive position, as a force of subordination, fracturing, diffusing, reproducing, as much as producing, creating, forcing, and guiding. I skip this because I fear the time element in this presentation. Farooq Dhondy, The Nation and the Novel. How is South Asian writing in a universal human context to be evaluated? Perhaps, as old literature has, or Jesus, when Dorothea of Middlemarch or Anna Karenina or Emma Bovary feel what they feel and do what they do, they can call upon no strictly biblical justifications. It takes George Eliot, Tolstoy, and Gustav Flaubert to construct a form which captures those nuances of feeling and brings an inclusive sympathy to the possibilities of human and social behavior. The novel in the European context was called upon to supply in narrative the definitions of love, faith, snobbery, war, peace, and several other things. It took up where faith left. Off and did the opposite of what heroic myths used to do. Some European writing, the novels of Dostoevsky and the philosophical works of Nietzsche, took this crisis of faith and the depth of myth head on, asking and explicitly answering questions. How many of South Indian writers are doing this? Are we questioning our religion? You'll find yes. There are many writers who question their religious belief. Are we questioning our gender sexuality? Yes, there are many in the contemporary writings who are doing the same kind of thing. Are we awakening like the European novel Once Upon a Time awakened to answer some of the things? Maybe yes, maybe no. Nothing goes on. Because when such a kind of literature is written, how do a culture respond to it? How do a society respond to that literature? How did the Europeans did and how the South Asians are doing? That is a big question that remains. So this question that a lady being murdered just yesterday and several other writers fleeing away from their mother nation into another country is also a kind of a reality that cannot be avoided. And in South Asia, he says this perhaps does not happen or is not happening or will happen or not. What Farooq Dhondy has to say. Of which necessity was South Asian writing in English form? The obvious answer is nationalism and the struggle for independence. In one or two works that I came across from Bhutan, there was a problem of insurgency, Nepal, Bhutan border issues, India, Bhutan border issues, and then there is a writing that is happening. A kind of a nationalism and independence in all these countries has played a very vital role in the rise of literature. The influence of the writing, though widely translated, suffered from the limitations of that at every step. New institutions, industrialization, global imports, rampant capitalism and corruption were changing India, or we can read its Indian subcontinent, and though the myths persisted, were modified and increasingly seen to be fantasy or escapism. Popular cinema in India is still a kind of escapism. People compare film critics like there is Chennai Express and then there is Madras Cafe, and which movie earns the money. So one movie which takes you into an illusion, into an escapism from the reality like Chennai Express, then it will be in the club of 300 crore rupees, whereas Madras Cafe will be struggling to earn a little bit of money also. The task then for the new cinema and the South Asian writing was to distance oneself from the myth and describe and dissect the personalities and possibilities of existence that emerge. how many of our writers are doing this? How many of our filmmakers are? It is not that nobody is doing. They are. Brave attempts are made by writers also. Brave attempts are made by the filmmakers also. But how do the culture respond? How do the society respond to that? That also is an important part of the observation. Indeed, obviously, Terry Eagleton do come and surface, like people argue that why do you politicize literature? Post-colonial aspect or the contemporary reading of the literature is more colored with the political kind of a thing. Well, we find an answer in Terry Eagleton when he says that there is no need to drag politics into literary theory. It has already been there from the beginning. We were not seeing earlier. Now we have started looking at the things that are already there. Earlier it was not perceived by us. Now perhaps we are able to perceive those things. This should not surprise for anybody of theory concerned with human meaning, value, language, feeling and experience will inevitably engage with broader, deeper beliefs about the nature of human individuals and societies. Problems of power and sexuality, interpretations of past history, versions of the present and the hopes for the future. Interpretations of past histories, which is a very much necessary part of the thing, where the trauma or memory novel plays a very vital role, and versions of the present and the hopes for the future are always remains. Dipesh Chakravarty's article is quite interesting so far as this narrative or memory novel is concerned. He also says that trauma is memory, and as Madam has already talked about this, I do not throw more light on the same thing. It will be a kind of repetition. So we see now a kind of an overview, bird's eye view over some of the selected texts that came in the recent past from the South Asian countries. Well, Bhutan, if you see, then we come across writings like Headwind, Lakshmi's Story by Alice Anna Verhage. And what is the theme of this writing? The struggle of a refugee child growing within the constraint wall of socially and culturally conservative society. And the basic idea is Nepal-Bhutan insurgency. Nepalese were thrown out of Bhutan by the monarchy and they came towards India also, but India also was not ready to help them, support them. And the same agony, same anxiety of the nearby borders or the nearby countries, how they happen, that is reflected in the another poem by Devi Subedi, Exiled Agonies. Few lines of this poem. In the beautiful village, country of the thunder dragon, far in the eastern world, I was born. I was only in my 4th year of childhood, barely uttering the word of motherhood. The tyrannical government of Bhutan, in monarchical, it declared Nepal race people as anti-nationals, and all the Nepalis were thrown out of Bhutan. And then, as he goes on writing, set the camp in Assam, northern India. Many died in starvations and malaria. The Indian CRP loaded people in the truck, did not allow to stay over. It is our bad luck. Stated Nepal is for Nepali race people, did not respect human rights. Situation was terrible. Life as a refugee is despairful. Many treated as free labor. Life wasn't peaceful. For 17 years, humanism were limited to boundary. I cannot express agonies of old and sundry. All our peaceful attempts to be back to our homeland gone in vain, for India did not join our hands. Chasing us out, the government of Bhutan is not some, still torturing and trying to exile 100,000. And then they went to USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Denmark, Netherlands, and then now the contemporary time that more than 20,000 are now in the United States, scattered in almost all cities in the new destinations. Dreaming to have future generation great, but for many reasons, lot has to regret. The worst situation in the bad economic condition, all Americans themselves are in the greatest tension. No job opportunities, nowhere to go, where to go now. So this is one agony that comes in Bhutan literature, which speaks about India on one side, Nepal on the other side, humanity on the third parameter, and how do the different countries look at the things. Nepal obviously had a kind of a past traditional writing along with India. Sanskrit was the beginning of the Nepal literature also. In their writing we find Sanskrit spiritual tradition, then we got revolutionary poets, nihilism replaced spiritual tradition, and then obviously diaspora writing also is from. There is interesting work by Govindaraj Bhattarai's, whose masterpiece Sukat Paila, that is Socrates' Footsteps, which was set against the time when the Maoist insurgency was at its peak. Again, Maoism, a civil war kind of situation, becoming a part of a literature. There is interesting observation in the Nepalese literature where Michael Hutt has played a very vital role in revival of the past literature. Well, again, is something like what William Jones and they were doing with Indian Sanskrit literature and rewriting of history. The same episode is found in the same piece. He has brought in Yogmaya's life in the text called Sarvatha Yogbani, and then analyzed the attempts that have been made by various activists and scholars to portray her as feminist rebel, a social reformer, and a progressive poet. So one Devi from a myth coming as with a modern way of dealing with the world, feminist rebel, social reformer, and a progressive poet. Well, there is a hand of one Westerner like Michael Hutt in the revival. Bangladesh obviously had a very troublesome time, and that is very well reflected in their literature. As we know that when East and West Bengal was divided before independence of India, it was still a very fertile ground for literature and other activities. In Pakistan era, that is East Pakistan after 1947, by and large the literature covered up the thematic concerns, which was the problem of language, Urdu or Bangla. And Pakistan wanted Urdu as an official language of East Pakistan, and which people were not ready to accept, and there was a revolt. And the another 1971 war was also based on, as one parameter, the linguistic identities of Bangla and the Muslims of Bangladesh. So it covered up, and still in many of the writings you find that insurgency, the struggle for the owning of a language, and writing about this communal, rural and urban problems. Bangladesh era, that is country comes into an existence after that war in 1971, and then liberation war, its consequences, hopeless human existence, and analysis of human mind and society. Normally it has happened whether it was French Revolution or American Revolution or Russian Revolution. At the end of the revolution, revolutionaries are by and large frustrated. They fought for a cause, and then they always see that the cause is not fulfilled. And then the things are going into bad hands. And the same thing was perceived in Bangladesh also. So that agony, that hopelessness of fighting for the cause of a country and then things going out of the things is also perceived in their writings. Very recently, if you see the writing, then we have Tahmima Anam, cruelty towards those women who suffered the cruelty on the hand of insurgent militants when the country was under the strife. And then when country became their own country, then their own people are implementing that kind of trauma over those women. So they want to have, they want to erase or marginalize in the search of a clean, linear history. And so these people were erased. And those things were, that episode comes into this novel, The Good Muslim. It is an exceptional and searching look at the hidden horrors of war and the appeal of religion in the aftermath of 1971 Bangladesh War of Liberation. There is a story of a brother and a girl. Brother stays there after the war, and girl goes abroad and becomes a doctor. She comes back and comes back to see that the brother has become a fanatic, Islamic, almost a terrorist kind of a person. But she has her own way of looking towards the brother. The Good Muslim, it gives the title that how and what happens that the people turn to become frantic so far as religiosity is concerned. The blame obviously goes to the circumstances rather than the individuals. The division is a result of Sohail's, that is the brother, fanatic devotion to, and Maya, the sister, protagonist, alienation from religion, and then there is a strife in a family regarding the religious issues. It's a part of a trilogy. First book was The Golden Age, this is the second, and third is to come. Well, so she is one recent contemporary writer to be looked upon when we look towards Bangladesh and its representation into the literature. But then this walls you will always find. There is a wall between brother and sister here. This narrow domestic walls, they are not crumbling down metaphorically in literature and politically on the maps also. Sri Lanka, we have an interesting work by Shehan Karuna Tilak. The name of the work is Chinaman. Full title is Chinaman, The Legend of Pradeep Matthew. And Pradeep Matthew is a spin bowler who has mysteriously disappeared. On his quest to find his unsung genius, WG, that is another character who is a drunkard and an old fellow out of the sports arena, good for nothing kind of a fellow, but his hero once upon a time was Pradeep Matthew, and he was suddenly lost. And this drunkard old fellow goes in search of that spinner, Pradeep Matthew, and the story is unfolding in this. So in the quest to find the unsung genius, WG uncovers a coach with 6 fingers, a secret bunker below a famous stadium, a Tamil tiger warlord, and startling truths about Sri Lanka, cricket, and himself. And we are dragged into this LTT, Tamil Tigers, and civil war of 1980s in Sri Lanka. So again, Jaffna as the Tamil area and the rest of the Swahili, and the conflict between Tamil and Swahili in Sri Lanka, the narrow domestic walls clearly surfaces, and the metaphor here is cricket. Obviously, it gives a very good post-colonial reading also. And it's an interesting read from Sri Lanka. The another work from Sri Lanka is Island of 1,000 Mirrors by Naomi Munawira. And she explores how women in Sri Lanka on opposite sides of the civil war negotiate the realities of life. Attempts to transcend a little more than 60 years of history, the violent and strife-torn decades of post-colonial Sri Lanka, through 3 generations of 2 families. And one lady in one family has been molested by Tamil Tigers, and then she was forced to join the Tamil Tigers, and she becomes a part of the Tamil Tigers militant group. Here also there is a family who goes abroad, and then they come with a new vision back to their own country, and then compare and contrast. So time and again we find in this contemporary writing that the characters go to West, and then they come back. Whether it's Tahnima in Bangladesh or Naomi in Sri Lanka, in both the narratives we find that there is a part of a family still going to the West, coming back and re-evaluating their own country, their culture, their conditions, and obviously in that we still perceive the narrow domestic walls that stand very strong. In Pakistan we have, and obviously many of the writings along with the reluctant fundamentalist by Mohsin Hamid and things, 9/11 played a very vital role in the Pakistani creative writers' consciousness, and they obviously try to present their side of the 9/11 trauma and the people, the Asians who were living in America, and how they have undergone the kind of an anguish. So city where origin matters less than the talent, New York, 3 metrostanis. It's a quite interesting word that he gives here. 3 metrostanis have the guts to claim the place as their own, but after 9/11 things go horribly wrong. Suddenly they find themselves in a changed America. Making the logical leap from dualities to multiplicities ponders New York's reputation as the proverbial melting pot of peoples and culture. Has New York or America still remained that proverbial melting pot of cultures and people, or now there are the walls for the different cultures and the people? A blotted sense of self-importance. Obviously, this is an interesting remark that I found by Mira Hashmi in one of the review of this book. This blotted sense of, which is quite true of most of the South Asian writing also. It should be pointed out that, for the most part, it sidesteps the pitfalls of over-earnestness and sentimentality that are the hallmarks of a lot of new South Asian literature. Self-pity. One has to come out of self-pity in one of the... Self-pity is one part of the South Asian literature, that we pity ourselves a lot. and then we compare the kind of thing. And this literature also has the same kind of a thing. The another work by Mohsin Hamid is the recent one, How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia. And it also again speaks about the Asian countries and the thing. Well, again here the metaphor is a self-help book, and the narrative style is also of a self-help book. We have Arvind Adiga, The White Tiger, also almost in a similar pattern, a kind of a self-help book. So how to be a better entrepreneur. You read Balaram Halwai's story and you learn about that, and here it is another story. Shows what it means to get rich in a rising Asia in a new novel at a time when the developing economies in the region are straining to push up their GDP figures. Mr. Pant, one of our government officials in inauguration of the SARC event, he said that South Asian countries are running for their GDP, economical growth and different things. He said first stability perhaps is necessary part, then the growing of a GDP. And in GDP and then there is happiness index, they do not match well. And he gave an example that Bhutan is a country where GDP is not much higher, but then the happiness index of Bhutanese is much better than the countries like India or the other one where there is more happy country. A nameless city in South Asia that sizzles with energy, opportunity and inequality, touches upon new South Asian realities, broken hearts, failed marriages, culture of corruption, politics, lifestyle pressures on fast street and the perennial near-war edge that Pakistan balances on. So no name of a city, no name of a character, but then it can be any city in South Asia, it can be anybody in South Asia, and the story goes on with a kind of a mirroring of image of failed marriages, broken hearts, corruption, politics, lifestyles, etc. A very interesting work from Pakistan is by Jamil Ahmed, and this time he takes us on the border of Afghanistan. Pakistan-Afghanistan border and the tribal people living on that border, and it's a collection of 3 long short stories where he deals with those people. All the 3 stories are connected to the story of Torbaz. The parents of Torbaz belong to the different tribes. They run everyone at 4 or 5 age. They both are captured and they are killed by the tribal people. The atrocities of the people raised of nation states as they seek to impose artificially constructed borders on older, more fluid worlds. And another true story is like the death of camels, where there is a girl, Gul Jana, who is a taker of camels, and she is just passing a border, unknowing that there is a border. And she thought that I have a Quran over my head and nothing will happen to me. Suddenly there are fires and camels and the girl both are killed, and Quran or nothing comes to save them. And then the point of honor is like when Torbaz's parents were butchered, the Baluch rebel, they thought that they will be praised and they will be given awards, but then they were captured and they were also killed by the another tribal people. He critiques the ruthless way of bordering countries. The tribal people, they don't know that from where the another country begins. They normally have the rituals like marriage or any of the thing among the people nearby villages, not knowing that this is another country. You cannot help the person on the other side of the border. You become a kind of a person with a charge of treason or other kind of a thing. But then they live in a borderless fluidity of the world where they do not have borders between their lifestyles, their living things. Suddenly there is a border imposed upon the outsider that now you cannot talk with your neighbors, you cannot marry your children in the neighbors, you cannot graze your camels on the other side of the pasture because that is not our country. It is suddenly now the other country. Now this, when it is done, what havoc does it build? Jamil Ahmed very beautifully tries to capture it. Muhammad Hanif, a very comical way of writing a novel that comes here is Our Lady of Alice Patti. And Alice is a criminal and savior. There is a contrasting thing about this character. A victim and heroine of a daft, evil little novel of comic genius. And with the story, and Grizzly's Sacred Heart. Sacred Heart is the name of the hospital where this lady, Alice Patti, is working. Be taken as a parable for Pakistan. Alice Bhatti belongs to a Dalit kind of a community in Sikh, which is living on the other side of Punjab, that is in Pakistan. And the father is a sweeper, and they are converted to Christianity. So you have Alice Bhatti. The name is the Christian, the surname is the Pakistani, and she works in a hospital, which is one of the most horrible place to work. And the narration goes that every day a lady dies in the hospital by any of the things, maybe raped and molested, or maybe bribery kind of thing, or maybe honor killing, but someday there is not a single day where a lady do not die in that hospital. Is this hospital a parable of Pakistan? It's quite a comical way of putting the thing that Muhammad Hanif comes with this novel. There is The Lowland. It's a story about two brothers, Udyan and Subhas Mitra. Again, one stays at the home, one goes abroad. One becomes an Naxalite, one becomes a scientist in America. The scientist comes back and he finds the family being shuttered down because of the Naxalite and the kind of a thing. So the retelling of this story do happen in various, we have seen in Pakistan, Bangladesh, here India again. The same metaphor do play a vital role in the narrative. And it is a kind of a good question to ask, that why again and again this metaphor is retold in our contemporary narratives. Udyan, drawn to the Naxalite movement, the rebellion ways to eradicate inequality and poverty. He will give everything, risk all, for what he believes. Subhas, the dutiful son, does not share his brother's political passion. He leaves home to pursue a life of scientific research in a quiet coastal corner of America. The Immigrant by Manju Kapoor is a story of Neena and Anand. And it's an arranged marriage. Again, a girl marries and goes to America. The story normally, the Canadian diasporic writers from India are very well acquainted with arranged marriage by Divakaruni. Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni also deals with the chemical patterns. It's a chronicle of middle-class Indian manners. Well, here there is a different way of looking at the things, a bit comical, a bit satirical, that the husband of Neena, the Anand, is suffering from a sexual problem. And then the problem of the husband and wife cannot have physical relations, and that goes on playing for a longer time in the novel. Her meat eating was the result of fragmentation and distress, not a desire for convenience. And she starts adapting with this cultural conflict of eating non-vegetarian food, clothing styles, and it normally comes in a streak of a Jane Austen way of writing by the female writers of diaspora. Her body was her own, and that included her digestive system and her vagina. Mother's death, what will she make of her Western feminist independence? Well, she goes on walking on the path, irrespective of her husband, and taking control of her digestive system by eating the food which she normally do not take under cultural constraints, or also have an affair with somebody else, speaking that my body is mine and I can do whatever in that sense. But this Western feminism gets a jolt when a message comes that her mother has passed away in India. Mother wanted to come to her, and what was the cause of coming? That when you become pregnant, when you become mother, I will come to take care of your child, and then there was no possibility of her becoming a mother. And then she is jolted within that, what would I do with all this Western kind of a thing, whereas I cannot make my mother and my family happy with any of such things. Scope is narrower, and its mode is more of a comical. The interesting writing by Pankaj Mishra, it's from the ruins of, it's a very post-colonial kind of a reading that comes here. And Mishra tells the story through the biographies of the three public intellectuals. The itinerant Persian-born agitator Jamal al-Din al-Afghani from Afghanistan, then Chinese reformer Liang Qichou from China, and Rabindranath Tagore from India. He joins the links of the South Asian intellectuals of the time when the sun never set on British Empire. And then their thoughts, their intellectuality is posed against the intellectuality of the Westerners. And then there is a conflict which he brings in. Through many setbacks and wrong turns, a powerful, contradictory, and ultimately unstoppable series of ideas were created that now lie behind everything from the Chinese Communist Party to Al-Qaeda, from Indian nationalism to Muslim brotherhood. Why there is Al-Qaeda, why there is communalism. One form of atrocities of humanity that you find in Afghanistan, you find in China, you find in India, you find in Pakistan. What are the root cause of these ideas that he tries to investigate? And the root cause were human, they were not anti-human. And somehow the implementation of those ideas turned into very much what we call an anti-humanistic kind of a thing. Usha K.R. deals with the metaphor of the monkey man. A few years back there was an idea and some monkey man was surfacing in the metropolitan cities at night and was attacking the people sleeping on the streets and other kind of thing. So playing on this metaphor, he tries to bring out a kind of a phobia of growing cities in India. What was it that they saw? A bat, a malevolent avatar, a sign of the displeasure of the gods, the grotesque mascot of a city that is growing too fast and crumbling too soon, or merely a monkey that has lost its path. And she makes use of several characters, and through their characters the narrative goes on interpreting the monkey man. Using evocative prose that reflects a profound understanding of human nature, Usha K.R. delves into the lives of her characters and their unexpected linked destinies in a city that has grown from pensioners' paradise to a frantic hub of the country's IT industry. That is Bangalore. And Bangalore can be replaced with entire India, or it can also be considered as South Asia. Interesting work by Uday Prakash. So it is written in Hindi language, Delhi Ki Diware, and translated by Jason Grunbaum as The Walls of Delhi. Again, 3 stories like Jamil writing in Pakistan, and the 3 stories deals with corruption in Delhi, in India. There is in one story there is a character like Mohandas, a Dalit, and Mohandas plays on the name Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and Mohandas this that comes here. And then there is in another story there is a small child. As he grows on younger, he becomes very intelligent, and his head is growing. And he gives the name Mango Sil. The name of the story is Mango Sil. And Mango Sil is the name of a disease that is given to that child. That says the child is very growing faster than expected intelligence. Now, Life Apart by Neil Mukherjee is a story where we find a gay protagonist like Ritvik, and it deals with Ritvik, a Kolkata orphan boy in Oxford University, and his everyday life of a gay in the London societies. I do not take much time because there is a narrative within narrative, and then again Tagore comes, and one of the Tagore's character is being novelized by Ritvik in his own writing also. Necropolis by Jit Thayil, it deals with a eunuch protagonist. Now these are some of the experiments that are coming, like your protagonists are not the simple man or a woman, it goes beyond this, and we find a gay or a eunuch as a protagonist of the narrative. Arvind Adiga's A White Tiger, which also deals with New India, corruption in India, and various ways of looking towards India. Amitav Ghosh's last one, River of Smoke, which takes us from India to China, and the opium trade that was there once upon a time during by East India Company, and that history is being retold, going back to the history and retelling the history that we come to see here in the writing. The same thing is also in Narcopolis by Jit Thayil. There is a Chinese digression, Chinese revolution, and the opium becomes the major thing in that narrative, in this narrative also. Well, I also brought these writers talking about their own works, brief videos, but we do not have time to view those videos. In one video which was here, which I will not see, but we'll just talk about it. One person is asking Amitav Ghosh that, what does this opium stand for in this narrative? How can you really, is it really the story of the opium trade by East India Company? Or it was the other thing? Well, it says that there is a character known as Bahram, which sounds like Barak, who is a good Parsi businessman, who is doing the business in China about the different trades, and He may like, may not like, but willy-nilly he is doing the things. Well, and then this O stands for oil also. And recently there is this oil politics that goes on around the world, like America, the way it goes on attacking one country after another country, where the conspiracy theories of the oil politics becomes quite stronger year by year. We are discussing this on the point when Syria is under a dangerous threat by another American attack. One poet, Meena Kandasamy, speaks or writes about Indian myth, or she takes head-on, as Farooq Dhondy said, that who are the writers who took head-on the myths of their own religion or the countries. Well, she is quite bold, quite infamous because of her poetries, and she, in her preface, she very boldly writes about herself, like, call me names if it comforts you, I no longer care. The scarlet letter is my monogram. I sew it on everything I wear. I tattoo it into permanence. I strive to be a slut in a world where all sex is sinful. I strive to be a shrew in society that believes in suffering in silence. I strive to be sphinx, part woman, part lioness, armed with all the lethal riddles. Come, unriddle me. But be warned, I never falter in a fight, and far worse, I seduce shamelessly. And in her poems, very remarkably, she takes on some of the major concerns which a traditional Indian mind finds more problematic in a way. She boldly liked that Dharma, justice, Dharmaraj Yudhishthir, and his father was unknown, so Dharmaraj is bastard and justice is bastard in India. Or she also writes about Eklavya and says that you don't need left thumb to pull a trigger or hurl a bomb. Or about Mahatma Gandhi, her views are quite bold, very openly writes in one of the poems that you big fraud, we hate you. And the last one also about Indra, Narendra, perfected science of slaughter, the genocidal god of the gods, on the infamous incident of 2002, and Narendra Modi being an attack of her writings. Well, these are the voices. A polyphony of voices that we see from the contemporary South Asian writers. They come out with this kind of a thing. Very quickly, time is running out, the observation. Coming to the films, the zeitgeist of this popular sentiment is by and large very well captured in popular culture. Films, one of the best mirrors to see representation of new myths, sweetly quoted bitter truths, and we find a kind of a perspectivism. Sweetly quoted bitter truths. So they seem to tell us a funny, a kind of a fantasy story of escapism, but is there any kind of a truth or a reality being captured which on a surface layer is perhaps not visible? Normally we find in popular Indian cinema, for example, they deal with the presence of Pakistan in the collective consciousness of India. So Indian movies and the Indian heroes, the protagonists, rarely go to another countries apart from Pakistan. Their voyage for any kind of, there are raw agents. Agent Vinod and Ektha Tiger, and the last one Madras Cafe. But they find the last one is a good example that he goes to Sri Lanka. So there is another country which has been explored, but then a very good opportunity to explore Sri Lanka has been missed out in Madras Cafe. And so the culture, the society, the people of Sri Lanka remained absent in the movie. We have some interesting, this movie, there are many, it can be listed down, like the series of the thing which deals with the kind of a thing. And then there are some interesting scenes also in some of the movies, like for example, Qurban.
The word jihad is mentioned in the Quran about 41 times. The words mercy, peace and compassion are mentioned about 355 times. Yes, come in. Come on in, Riaz. Sit down, please. Contrary to popular belief in most Western cultures, Islam is a religion that preaches peace and tolerance. Yes, Patricia.
If Islam truly is a religion that preaches peace, then how come the world's most troubled spots, the West Bank, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, they're all plagued with Islamic terrorism?
Well, that depends on your definition of terrorism. Some might argue that the US invasions of countries like Iraq and Afghanistan are also acts of terrorism.
Those were acts of war to get rid of despotic regimes.
Or means of getting at a country's oil.
Conspiracy theories.
Well,
Yeah?
yes, please. Go ahead, Nancy.
Mr. Khan is right. I mean, if we're talking about terrorists, the world's biggest terrorists are the white superpowers.
Come on now.
No, really, stop and think about it.
Explain 9/11.
Okay. Do you know how many people died in the Twin Towers strike?
Around 3,000.
And do you have any idea how many people died in the bombing of Afghanistan? Take a wild guess. More than 15,000 people died. And that's just conservative figures. About 50,000 tons of explosives were dropped on innocent civilians. Men, women, children.
But that was because of the Taliban.
Now that you brought it up, did you know that the Taliban was a creation of the CIA? To fight the Russians.
Whatever. They were still harboring terrorists.
Yeah, right. Terrorists that were never found. Just like the weapons of mass destruction that were never found in Iraq. Do you want to get into the death toll in Iraq? 500,000 civilians and counting. And what do Britain and America say when they don't find these weapons? It's simple. They just say sorry. And still refuse to relinquish control of these countries.
What are you trying to say?
What I'm trying to say is that just because you're American, wear a fancy suit, and call yourself the president, doesn't make you any less of a terrorist. I'm saying that if you don't stop meddling in other people's countries, you will face a backlash.
If Muslims like you feel that way, then why don't you get out of our country?
Well, so stop meddling in other countries, or the other voice, why don't you get out of our country? Well, there is the voice that normally remains as a sound, even in the debates between the South Asian countries, like Bhutanese poet says, get out of our country. In India says, get out of our country. So this voice is normally, this is how not only the West and the East, but within the South Asian also the strong voice normally remains. Well, there are very interesting movies in Pakistan like Khuda Ke Liye or this Ramchand Pakistani. There is a brief trailer of the movie.
नाम बोल। पाकिस्तान के लिए जासूसी कब से जाते हैं?
मैं कोई जासूस नहीं हूँ साहब।
एक और पाकिस्तान और इंडिया की लड़ाई क्या करिए?
Some of the movies from Pakistan, how it portrays, even Khuda Ke Liye is an interesting kind of a thing. And there is a movie like Veer Zara, which does not take us into the Western world, but then it portrays a Pakistani a lawyer, a female lawyer, who fights a case for one army personnel who is in the prison cells of Pakistan and tries to see that he can get out. And that is one movie where there is no West, and there is a kind of an answer that we can also lead towards a better way of living within this narrow domestic walls. Some of the questions like, is literature representing what ought to be done, or the question like, literature do what we want it to be done, or rather it will be faithful to the truth reality of human condition in South Asia, or perhaps it is not performing its role in rather metaphorical way. The journey across the borders that of Bahram in River of Smoke, or a boy in Ramchand Pakistani, or that of Veer in Search of Zara or Agents of Indian Road, Vinod Vikram or Tiger, symbolically expressed a desire to breach the borders and willingness to see that the narrow domestic walls become so porous that such songs do not find space in our imagination, and humans enjoy the freedom like birds, rivers, breeze. We aspire to see no more Ramchands or Tor Bazis or Guljanas sacrificing on borders of our fragmented South Asia. And there is no need to write such kind of songs like पंछी नदियाँ पवन के झोंके कोई सरहद ना इन्हें रोके क्या पाया हमने इंसान होके. I end with the idea of Tagore and Gandhi. When they spoke about the political liberty, rather than Swaraj, they thought of Suraj. We can think of the same thing in South Asia, that rather than Swaraj, the Suraj, which can perhaps be something that our literature can also look towards. Reading of all these literatures and some of the good movies, we can say that it gives us a reason to be hopeful because of the freshness in narrative, newness of metaphor, and confidence, boldness, and fearlessness of new breed of writers. Thank you all of you.
It's been high quality, but we are already running short of time. That is why I had to send you 2 messages to conclude. Anyway, I beg your pardon, sir, for this. And out of the audience, I realized that despite the fact that it was a post-lunch session, they gave you a rapt ear. To be honest, this is my observation. Now, may I please call